inspire others to examine their own assumptions and biases, to challenge the traditional models of philanthropy that kept donors at a comfortable distance from the people they claimed to help. She would speak at conferences and write articles and give interviews, always making sure to center Rosa's voice and experience, always acknowledging her own mistakes and the privilege that had allowed her to make those mistakes without facing serious consequences. The story would spread beyond philanthropic circles, capturing the public imagination in unexpected ways. A journalist from a major newspaper picked it up 6 months after the Bridge program launch, writing a profile that went viral online. The headline read, "The Millionaire Who Became a Lunch Lady: What One Woman Learned About Education, Privilege and Real Change." And suddenly Margaret's phone was ringing constantly with interview requests, speaking invitations and inquiries from other wealthy individuals who wanted to know how they could apply similar principles to their own charitable work. Margaret was initially uncomfortable with the attention, worried that the focus on her personal story was overshadowing the real work of the Bridge program and the experiences of people like Rosa. But Sophie, who had developed a sophisticated understanding of media and messaging through her work on the program, helped her mother see the opportunity in the spotlight. "People are interested in your story because it's relatable," Sophie explained one evening as they prepared talking points for an upcoming television interview. "Everyone has felt disconnected from their kids. Everyone has struggled to know how to help someone they love. Everyone has made mistakes and wondered if they could be forgiven. Your story gives them hope that change is possible, that it's never too late to course correct, that being vulnerable and admitting you were wrong can actually make things better rather than worse." Sophie paused, choosing her words carefully. "That you're right, that it can't just be about you. Every interview, every speech, every article needs to redirect attention to the actual work, to people like Rosa, to the systemic changes we're trying to make. Use your platform to amplify other voices, not just to tell your own story." Margaret listened to her daughter with pride and amazement. When had Sophie become so wise, so strategic, so clear about how to navigate complex situations with grace and integrity? The answer, of course, was that Sophie had always had this potential, but it had been buried under the weight of expectations and grief, and the pressure to be perfect. Working on the Bridge program had given her a context to develop these skills, to discover what she was capable of when she was motivated by genuine passion rather than fear of failure. The television interview, when it happened, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Margaret sat on a couch across from a nationally known talk show host, acutely aware that millions of people would see this conversation, that her words would be dissected and analyzed and probably criticized by many. But she had Rosa and Sophie sitting in the green room, watching on a monitor, silently supporting her, and that gave her courage. The host started with the sensational angle, as Margaret had expected. "So you actually went undercover, disguising yourself as a cafeteria worker in your own daughter's school. That's pretty extreme. What were you thinking?" Margaret took a breath and answered honestly. "I was thinking that I was desperate and didn't know what else to do. My daughter was struggling, and nothing I tried was helping. I thought if I could see what was really happening, if I could observe her environment without the filter of being a wealthy donor or concerned parent, I might understand what she needed. But I also want to be very clear. What I did was wrong. It was invasive and dishonest, and I violated the trust of everyone at that school. I'm not proud of my methods, even though I'm grateful for what I learned." The host seemed taken aback by Margaret's directness, her refusal to sugarcoat or justify her actions. "But it worked, didn't it? Your daughter is doing better now. You've started this program that's helping teachers. You've completely changed your approach to philanthropy. Don't the ends justify the means?" "No," Margaret said firmly. "The ends don't justify the means. I hurt people with my deception, particularly my daughter and Rosa Martinez, the cafeteria worker who turned out to be a credentialed teacher from Mexico. They had every right to cut me out of their lives completely. The fact that they chose to forgive me and work with me is a testament to their grace and generosity, not to the validity of my methods." The interview continued for another 15 minutes, with Margaret carefully steering the conversation toward the Bridge program, toward the challenges faced by foreign-trained teachers toward Rosa's story and expertise. She shared statistics about how many credentialed teachers were working in jobs far below their skill level, about the shortage of teachers in American schools and the absurdity of having talented educators unable to practice their profession because of bureaucratic barriers. When the host asked about Rosa, Margaret insisted on bringing her onto the set, and together they talked about what the program had meant for Rosa personally, what it could mean for thousands of other teachers in similar situations. Rosa spoke eloquently about her experience, about the pain of being unable to do the work she loved, about the joy of finally being back in a classroom, about her hopes that other teachers wouldn't have to wait as long as she did to get the support they needed. The segment ended with information about how people could support the Bridge program, either through donations or by volunteering to help with the various administrative and logistical challenges involved in helping teachers navigate the recertification process. Margaret watched the contact information flash on the screen and hoped that at least some of the millions of viewers would be moved to act, to contribute in whatever way they could to this work that had become so meaningful to her. After the show, back in the green room, Sophie threw her arms around both her mother and Rosa. "You were both amazing," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You told the truth, you didn't shy away from the hard parts, and you made people care about something that most of them probably never thought about before." The response to the interview exceeded all of Margaret's expectations. The Bridge program's website crashed within an hour from the volume of traffic. Donations poured in from thousands of individual donors. Small amounts mostly, $5 here and $20 there, but collectively adding up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Volunteers signed up to help with everything from language translation, to legal assistance, to simply providing emotional support to teachers going through the recertification process. But perhaps most meaningful were the messages from foreign-trained teachers themselves. Dozens and then hundreds and eventually thousands of them, reaching out to share their own story, to ask for help, to express their gratitude that someone was finally paying attention to their struggles. Margaret read these messages late into the night, her heart breaking and mending with each one, understanding more deeply than ever how much talent and potential was being wasted because of systems that were never designed to recognize or value the contributions of immigrants. One message in particular stayed with Margaret, from a woman named Amina who had been a university professor of literature in Syria before fleeing the civil war with her 3 children. Amina wrote that she had been cleaning office buildings at night for 5 years, unable to afford the courses and exams required to teach at the college level in the United States, unable to even get her credentials evaluated because the university where she had taught no longer existed, destroyed in the bombing of her city. "I used to teach Shakespeare and Dickens and Joyce to students who loved literature as much as I did," Amina wrote. "Now I empty trash cans and vacuum carpets, and I feel like I am disappearing, like the person I used to be is slowly being erased. Your program gives me hope that maybe I can find my way back to myself, to the work that made my life feel meaningful and purposeful. Thank you for seeing us, for understanding that we have so much to contribute if only we are given the chance." Margaret forwarded the message to Rosa and Sophie, and the 3 of them decided to make Amina's case a priority, working to figure out how the Bridge program could help someone whose credentials were from an institution that no longer existed, whose documentation had been lost in the chaos of war and displacement. It took months of work, of research and phone calls and creative problem solving, but eventually they found a path forward, partnering with several universities to create a portfolio assessment process that would allow Amina and others in similar situations to demonstrate their knowledge and experience, even without traditional documentation. The day Amina was offered a position teaching literature at a community college, Margaret received a video message from her, and watching it reduced Margaret to tears. Amina was standing in an empty classroom, running her hand along the whiteboard, touching the desks, her face luminous with joy and disbelief. "I am here," she kept saying. "I am really here. I am a teacher again. I exist again." Sophie was the one who suggested they create a documentary about the Bridge program, following several teachers through their recertification journeys. She had been taking video and film classes as part of her preparation for college, and she saw the potential to reach even more people through visual storytelling. Margaret was initially hesitant, worried about further exploiting people's stories for publicity, but Rosa and the other teachers they consulted were enthusiastic about the idea. "Our stories need to be told," Rosa said at a meeting where they discussed the documentary proposal. "Not just for us, but for all the people who don't understand what we've been through, who don't realize how many talented, educated, experienced people are stuck in jobs that don't use their skills, because the system makes it so hard to prove our credentials. If a documentary can help change that, if it can inspire other communities to create their own programs like this, then it's worth the discomfort of being so public." So Sophie took on the documentary as her senior project, working with a professional filmmaker who volunteered his time and expertise to help her develop her skills. They spent months filming, following Rosa in her classroom, interviewing Amina as she prepared for her portfolio assessment, documenting the stories of a Nigerian doctor who was driving for a rideshare service, a Ukrainian engineer working in a warehouse, a Venezuelan psychologist cleaning houses. Each story was different, but the themes were consistent: frustration at having their education and experience dismissed, determination to find a way forward, gratitude for finally having support in navigating an impossibly complex system. Margaret's role in the documentary was minimal, which was exactly as she wanted it. She appeared briefly to explain the origins of the Bridge program, to acknowledge her mistakes and what she had learned, but the focus remained on the teachers and other professionals whose lives had been impacted by the program. The documentary premiered at a film festival the month before Sophie left for college, winning an audience award and securing distribution through a streaming platform that would make it available to millions of viewers. The morning Sophie was scheduled to leave for college, Margaret woke up early, unable to sleep through her mixture of excitement and sadness. Her daughter was going off into the world, ready to pursue her dream, equipped with skills and confidence and a sense of purpose that had seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. Margaret got up and made coffee, then stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunrise, thinking about how much had changed, how much she had changed, since that desperate decision to go undercover in her daughter's school. She heard Sophie's footsteps on the stairs and turned to see her daughter entering the kitchen, already dressed, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. They looked at each other for a long moment, both of them emotional but trying to hold it together, both of them aware that this was a significant transition, the end of one chapter, and the beginning of another. "I made your favorite breakfast," Margaret said, gesturing to the table where she had laid out fresh fruit, yogurt, and the blueberry muffins Sophie loved. They ate together in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only exists between people who know each other deeply and don't need to fill every moment with words. When they finished, Sophie reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "Thank you," Sophie said simply, "for everything, for being brave enough to admit you were wrong, for being willing to change, for showing me that it's okay to struggle and make mistakes, for introducing me to Rosa and to work that actually matters, for becoming the mother I needed instead of staying the mother you thought you should be." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face, making no effort to stop them. "You're going to do amazing things," she said. "Not because of me or despite me, but because of who you are, because of the person you've chosen to become. I'm so proud of you, Sophie. Not because of your accomplishments or your grades or what college you're going to, but because of your character, your compassion, your commitment to using your privilege to help others." They drove to the university together, the car packed with Sophie's belongings, the journey taking several hours that they filled with conversation about Sophie's classes, her roommate, her plans to start a campus chapter of the Bridge program, her excitement about being independent and her nervousness about being away from home for the first time. When they finally arrived and began the process of moving Sophie into her dorm room, Margaret was struck by how competent and confident her daughter had become. Sophie directed where things should go, made introductions to other students and their families, navigated the chaos of move-in day with ease and grace. This was not the struggling, anxious girl Margaret had been so worried about 2 years earlier. This was a young woman who knew herself, who trusted herself, who was ready to take on the world. Rosa had made the drive to the university as well, wanting to be there for Sophie's move-in day. And the three of them worked together to set up Sophie's half of the small dorm room, hanging posters and organizing books and laughing at the stories Sophie told about the other students she had already met online in her class's Facebook group. When it was finally time to say goodbye, Sophie hugged Rosa first, holding on tight and whispering something that Margaret couldn't hear, but that made Rosa's eyes fill with tears. Then Sophie turned to her mother, and they embraced for a long moment, neither of them wanting to let go, both of them knowing they had to. "I love you, Mom," Sophie said. "Thank you for fighting for our relationship even when I pushed you away. Thank you for not giving up on me." "I love you too, sweetheart," Margaret replied, "more than I could ever put into words. And I'm not worried about you, not anymore. I know you're going to be okay. More than okay." Margaret and Rosa walked back to their cars together, both of them wiping away tears, both of them feeling the bittersweet ache of watching someone they love move into a new phase of life. They stood in the parking lot for a few minutes, neither of them quite ready to get in their cars and drive away, to accept that this moment was ending. "You did good," Rosa said finally. "Sophie is extraordinary, and a lot of that is because of you, because of how you loved her and fought for her, and were willing to change for her." Margaret shook her head. "I think it's more accurate to say that Sophie is extraordinary despite me, or maybe because of what we all went through together. But thank you for saying that. And thank you for everything you've done, for Sophie and for me. You saved us both, in different ways." Rosa smiled. "We saved each other. That's what people do when they really show up for one another, when they're willing to be vulnerable and honest and present. We all needed each other, and we all contributed something essential." They hugged goodbye, promising to stay in close touch, to continue working together on the Bridge program, to make sure they got together regularly, even though their daily routines would no longer intersect the way they had. Over the past 2 years, Margaret watched Rosa drive away, then got into her own car and sat for a moment before starting the engine, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been a desperate, disconnected woman who thought she could solve her problems through deception and control. She had been wealthy but isolated, generous but disconnected, well-intentioned but blind to her own limitations and the harm caused by her privilege. The decision to go undercover had been wrong in so many ways, a violation of trust and boundaries, an act of desperation that could have destroyed her relationship with her daughter permanently. But somehow, through grace and hard work, and the wisdom of people like Rosa, who saw past her mistakes to the genuine desire for change underneath, Margaret had been transformed. She had learned to listen more than she spoke, to partner rather than direct, to be vulnerable rather than always in control. She had learned that real wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in relationships and meaning, and the ability to contribute to something larger than yourself. Most importantly, she had learned that we all need teachers, that learning never stops, that the wisest among us are those who remain humble enough to keep growing and changing throughout their lives. Rosa had been her teacher, showing her what true strength and dedication looked like. Sophie had been her teacher, showing her that love sometimes means being willing to be hated temporarily, to hold space for anger and hurt, to trust that healing is possible even when things seem irreparably broken. As Margaret drove away from the university, heading back to a house that would feel too empty without Sophie in it, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. Sadness at this ending, at her daughter moving into independence and a life that would increasingly be separate from her own. Pride at who Sophie had become and excitement about who she would continue to become. Gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, for the people who had helped them along the way, for the lessons learned and the growth achieved. But mostly, Margaret felt hope. Hope that the work she and Rosa and Sophie had started would continue to grow and expand, helping more teachers and other professionals rebuild their careers and their sense of identity and purpose. Hope that other wealthy individuals would be inspired to examine their own assumptions and biases, to use their resources in more collaborative and humble ways. Hope that her relationship with Sophie would continue to deepen even as they lived separate lives, that they would remain close not out of obligation, but but out of genuine friendship and mutual respect. The documentary about the Bridge program aired 3 months after Sophie started college, and its impact was immediate and profound. Thousands more people reached out asking for help, wanting to start similar programs in their own communities, offering to donate time or money or expertise to support the work. The phone calls and emails were overwhelming, and Margaret had to hire additional staff to manage all the inquiries and opportunities that arose from the increased visibility. But Margaret made sure to stay grounded in the actual work, to not get so caught up in the publicity and expansion that she lost sight of the individual people whose lives were being changed by the program. She still met regularly with Rosa and the other teachers who had been through the program, listening to their experiences, learning from their insights, making sure the program continued to evolve based on feedback from the people it was designed to serve. She also made sure to maintain her relationship with Sophie, talking on the phone several times a week, visiting campus when Sophie wanted her there, respecting her daughter's independence while also making sure Sophie knew that her mother was always available if she needed support or just wanted to talk. Their relationship had transformed into something more like friendship, still with the foundation of mother and daughter, but with a new element of equality and mutual respect that made it richer and more satisfying than it had been before. During Sophie's winter break from college, the 3 of them, Margaret, Sophie, and Rosa, took a trip together to Mexico, visiting the town where Rosa had grown up and taught school before immigrating to the United States. Rosa showed them the school where she had worked, introduced them to former colleagues and students, shared stories about her life before everything changed. It was healing for Rosa to return as someone who had succeeded, who had overcome the obstacles and made it back to the classroom, who could show her community that the sacrifices and struggles had ultimately led to something meaningful. They visited Rosa's mother, who still lived in the same small house where Rosa had been raised, and the older woman cooked them a feast, presenting dish after dish of traditional food, beaming with pride as she talked about her daughter, the teacher, about the program that was helping so many people, about these new friends who had come all the way to Mexico to visit. Margaret and Sophie were embraced as part of the family, included in the celebration and the storytelling, welcomed with a warmth that made Margaret's heart ache with gratitude and belonging. On their last night in Mexico, the 3 of them sat on the roof of Rosa's childhood home, looking up at stars that seemed brighter and more numerous than they ever appeared in the city where they now all lived. They talked about their dreams for the future, about the expansion of the Bridge program, about Sophie's education and career plans, about Rosa's goals for her students and her hopes for her own children. "I've been thinking about something," Rosa said, her voice thoughtful in the darkness, "about how much emphasis we put on individual success, individual achievement, individual recognition. But the thing that has made all of this possible, Sophie, healing, Margaret, changing, me getting back to teaching, the Bridge program helping all these other people, none of it happened because any one person was exceptional. It happened because we were willing to be connected, to need each other, to let ourselves be vulnerable and changed by our relationships." Sophie sat up, excited by Rosa's words. "That's exactly what I want to write about, what I want to study in my education policy classes, how we've created systems that prioritize individual achievement over collective well-being, that celebrate people who succeed alone rather than people who lift each other up, that make it shameful to need help rather than recognizing that we all need help, that interdependence is actually a strength rather than a weakness." Margaret listened to them talk, marveling at the wisdom and insight they both possessed, feeling grateful beyond measure that these 2 extraordinary women had come into her life, that they had been willing to teach her and challenge her and walk alongside her as she fumbled her way toward becoming a better person. "I think the most important thing I've learned through all of this," Margaret said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "is that transformation is always possible, but it requires being willing to die to who you were before. I had to let go of my identity as the person with all the answers, the one who could fix everything with money and connections. I had to be willing to be wrong, to be humiliated, to have everything I thought I knew challenged. And it was painful, so painful, but on the other side of that pain was a kind of freedom. I didn't even know I was missing. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each of them processing these thoughts, feeling the weight and possibility of what they were discussing. Finally, Rosa spoke again. When I lost my identity as a teacher, when I became just a cafeteria worker in the eyes of everyone around me, I felt like I was disappearing. But what I eventually realized was that my identity, my worth, my value as a person couldn't be taken away by a job title or lack of credential. Those things were real and they mattered, that they weren't the essence of who I was. The essence was my love of learning, my commitment to helping others, my refusal to give up even when things seemed hopeless. And those things stayed with me even when everything else was stripped away. Sophie nodded vigorously. That's what you helped me understand too, Rosa. That I didn't have to be perfect or brilliant or successful in traditional ways to be valuable. That I could struggle and fail and still be worthy of love and respect. That my worth wasn't conditional on my achievements. Margaret felt tears sliding down her cheeks again, grateful for the darkness that hid them, though she suspected both Rosa and Sophie knew she was crying. I'm so grateful for both of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For your patience with me, for your willingness to forgive me, for everything you've taught me about what really matters in life. We're grateful for you too, Sophie said, reaching over to squeeze her mother's hand. For being brave enough to admit you were wrong, for being willing to change, for using your resources to amplify voices that usually get ignored, for becoming the person we needed you to be. They sat under the stars for hours, talking and laughing and crying, 3 women who had been brought together by chance and had chosen to become family, bound not by blood, but by shared experience and genuine love and respect. When they finally went inside to sleep, Margaret lay awake for a long time, thinking about how far they had all come, how much they had all changed, how grateful she was for every moment of the journey, even the painful parts, even the mistakes and failures and humiliations. The trip to Mexico marked a turning point in many ways. For Rosa, it was a healing reconnection with her roots, a chance to integrate who she had been with who she had become, to show her community that immigration and struggle hadn't defeated her, but had ultimately made her stronger and more resilient. For Sophie, it was an expansion of her worldview, a deeper understanding of the challenges faced by immigrants, a solidifying of her commitment to spend her life working on issues of equity and justice. For Margaret, it was a reminder of how much she still had to learn, how important it was to stay humble and curious, to keep seeking out voices and perspectives different from her own. When they returned home, Margaret threw herself back into the work of expanding the Bridge program, but with a renewed sense of purpose and direction, informed by everything she had experienced in Mexico. She began working with advocacy organizations to push for policy changes that would make it easier for foreign-trained professionals to get their credentials recognized, testifying before legislative committees, meeting with elected officials, using her wealth and connections not to impose her own agenda, but to amplify the voices of people like Rosa, who had lived experience with the broken systems. Sophie continued excelling in college, maintaining close ties with the Bridge program, while also exploring other areas of interest, from education reform to immigration policy to community organizing. She came home for visits and brought friends with her, filling Margaret's large house with young people full of passion and ideas, and determination to make the world better. Margaret loved these visits, loved hearing the debates and discussions, loved providing space and resources for these future changemakers to gather and plan and dream. Rosa became a mentor teacher at Lincoln Heights High School, training new teachers and sharing her expertise with colleagues, while also staying actively involved with the Bridge program. She served on the advisory board, helped screen and select candidates for support, and offered emotional encouragement to teachers going through the recertification process. She also reconnected with teaching colleagues from Mexico, many of whom had also immigrated and were facing similar challenges, and began organizing support groups where they could share resources and strategies and emotional support. 2 years after the documentary aired, on the anniversary of the day Margaret's disguise had been exposed in the cafeteria at Lincoln Heights High School, the 3 of them gathered for dinner at Margaret's house to celebrate how far they had all come. The Bridge program had helped over 300 teachers get recertified by that point, and similar programs had been started in 6 other cities based on their model. Margaret's approach to philanthropy had been written about in business schools and non-profit management programs as an example of how to do collaborative, community-centered work that actually addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. But as they sat around Margaret's dining room table, eating a meal that they had cooked together, laughing about memories from the past 2 years and making plans for the future, what felt most significant wasn't the numbers or the accolades or the systemic changes, as important as those things were. What felt most significant was the depth of their connection, the genuine love and respect they had for each other, the way they had each been transformed by their willingness to stay in relationship, even when it was hard, even when they wanted to walk away, even when they had every right to give up on each other. "I want to make a toast," Sophie said, raising her glass of wine, "to terrible decisions that somehow led to beautiful outcomes, to disguises that got exposed and truths that got revealed, to mothers who are willing to admit they were wrong and teachers who see students as whole people and daughters who learn to forgive, to all of us and to everything we've built together." They clinked their glasses together, and Margaret looked at the 2 women who had saved her life in ways they would never fully understand, who had shown her what really mattered, who had taught her that transformation was always possible if you were brave enough to let yourself be changed. "To us," Margaret echoed, "to the family we chose to become, to the work we're doing and the work still ahead of us, to learning and growing and staying humble enough to keep being surprised by what we don't know, to teachers, official and unofficial, who show up every day to make a difference, to second chances and third chances, and as many chances as it takes to get things right, to love," Rosa added simply, "in all its forms, the love that pushes us to grow, the love that forgives our mistakes, the love that sees us truly and accepts us completely, the love that changes everything." They drank their wine and ate their meal and told stories long into the night, and Margaret felt a peace and contentment that she had never experienced before, a sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing, surrounded by exactly the people she was meant to be with. The millionaire principal in disguise had discovered that a cafeteria worker was tutoring her struggling daughter, and what she revealed about herself, about privilege, about what truly matters, about the difference between charity and solidarity, about the transformative power of authentic human connection had indeed changed 3 lives forever. But more than that, it had started ripples that spread far beyond those 3 lives, touching hundreds and eventually thousands of others, creating new possibilities and pathways for people who had been locked out and overlooked. And as Margaret sat at her table, surrounded by chosen family, as she listened to Sophie and Rosa talking animatedly about their latest ideas for expanding the program, as she felt the warmth of belonging and purpose and genuine connection, she knew that this was the real wealth, the only wealth that actually mattered. Not the money in her bank accounts or the house she owned, or the donations she could make, but this feeling of being part of something meaningful, of using her life in service of others, of staying open to learning and changing and growing until her very last breath. The story that had begun in deception had become a story of redemption and transformation and hope. The disguise had been stripped away, but in its place was something far more valuable: authenticity, vulnerability, genuine connection across differences, and a commitment to keep showing up, keep learning, keep trying to do better, keep fighting for a world where everyone's gifts and talents are recognized and valued. If you've been moved by this story, I invite you to reflect on your own life. Where are you living behind disguises? Where are you letting fear or pride or privilege keep you from authentic connection? Who are the teachers in your life that you might be overlooking because they don't have the credentials or status you expect? What would change if you approached your relationships and your work with more humility, more vulnerability, more willingness to be transformed by the people you encounter? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe to stay connected to stories that matter. Hit like if this story resonated with you, and you want to see more content that challenges us to examine our assumptions and grow into better versions of ourselves. Because that's what this is really all about, not achieving perfection, but committing to the messy, beautiful, ongoing work of becoming more fully human, more deeply connected, more genuinely alive to the possibilities that exist when we let ourselves be changed by love.